Squatchers Lounge podcast. We call Mulligan and invite Jamie S. back to the show. We'll talk about the Bluff Creek Project, recap Jeff's recent expedition, and get right into the topic of Bigfoot self-awareness. Or is that consciousness? Or self-recognition? This is gonna get complicated.
Screw it, I'm going intelligent design.
Speaking of intelligent design, I present to you your host, the Reverend Jeff Kelly.
Welcome aboard, everybody. You have joined us for the Squatchers Lounge podcast, Season 2, Episode 20. I am indeed your host, Reverend Jeff Kelly, and over here to the other side of me is the greatest announcer man in the Squatchers Lounge podcast history, Mr. David Batdorf. How you doing, buddy?
Pretty good, pretty good. I'm actually debating the existence of Jamie S. these days.
Yeah. Much like the elusive Sasquatch, I know we announced, I even verified it after I got back yesterday, that Jamie S. would be joining us from the Bluff Creek Project, but apparently something has happened to him. He has the link. He may join us as we go along. However, he's not imperative to tonight's conversation, so we'll talk about some other really cool, interesting things coming up here real soon.
I'm just worried. Like I'm thinking Albert Ostman going on like he's like wrapped up in a sleeping bag being carried off by Sasquatch right now. That's really a possibility.
Yeah. Sleeping bags are the burritos for the Sasquatch world. You know, I have to worry. I have to wonder about that too. You know, because the dude lives in like the squatchiest place on the planet. I mean, you know, next to where you live, this would be like number 2 on my list to go and get lost in. I would love to spend 90 days. If somebody would outfit me and supply me for 90 days there in the rainforest there in the redwoods, I'd get something solid. I'd be able to track it far enough to get definitive prints with at least some kind of detail to them that we know we're dealing with individuals and not just random tracks. So, David, you know, you posted this thing the other day about, what was it, the Heidelbergensis now?
Oh, no. Are you talking about the Kennewick man?
Yeah, the Kennewick man. Go now. Explain that to me. I read it. You confused the crap out of me as usual. Come on, there, science geek.
Okay. So, like, Kennewick man has always been one of those things where people they're like, well, maybe this is, you know, it doesn't fit the typical Native American skeleton. They found it, you know, in the Columbia River in Washington, but it looks almost. I mean, like it's a large skeleton. It's a little bit kind of European, almost Neanderthal, Cro-Magnon looking. But what you know, when it really boils down to it, just looks like a more Caucasian Native American. And people have debated this forever. And then of course it gets, because it's a mystery, it gets pulled into the Sasquatch question and all sorts of other stuff. But they recently just found. Basically a teenage skeleton that I believe is something like 12,000 years old on the Yucatan Peninsula underwater. It was like she basically fell into a limestone cavern that would have been above sea level at that time, 12,000 years ago. And was preserved. And I watched all these little clips and videos, and it's just fascinating. I mean, it's perfect. They got DNA evidence, and it really does more closely match Europeans like of that time than it does the East Asian population that is also, but when you look at the actual maps and distributions of gene flow of like Brian Sykes' $7 of Eve and all that into the North Americas, it makes sense. But it looks like there were 2 completely separate time-wise migrations in. One, the earlier one was going to be this more Caucasoid European. Middle Eastern, like probably going over the Himalayas, and then the other one, because there would have been a big ice sheet coming off of the mountain and going into the ocean, later opened up to more in that like 10 to 8,000 year range, and then that 15 to 10,000 year range of ago. And yeah, so it's really fascinating, and it really opens up a lot of things, and unfortunately takes Kennewick man out of the mix of being a possible Sasquatch skeleton, because it really does resemble this teenage girl.
Right. Okay, so What does it really boil down to in the grand scheme of things? Possibly that the great primate of the planet may be more prolific than what was once originally thought, that everything came up out of Africa, and that this is still leading that there could have been interbreeding between those two types of species that come from the different areas of the world. Is that what we're still looking at here?
This one, it's not. This one is everything is more contemporary, and it's basically gene flow of modern Homo sapiens. So we're not looking at like yeah, okay, so you're probably going to pick up some of that Neanderthal DNA, and maybe as you're coming over, maybe the Denisovans would have still been around at that time. But they haven't done enough of the genome. They just did a little mitochondrial blast. They haven't done enough of the genome of this teenage girl, and unfortunately Kennewick Man, because the tribal leaders there have really limited the amount of study that we can do on this particular thing, which adds to the mystery, which is of course why the cryptozoologists pull it in immediately. But they're not going to be able to sequence DNA from Kennewick Man. However, the morphological similarities are, you can't just make that leap, but make it look as if, and the timeline and the dating, because the reason that Kennewick Man was so interesting is because it was too early to be the contemporary Pacific Northwest Native Americans. But we had to get all the way down to Peru and Chile somehow. So I mean that makes sense.
Well, that was like the voyage of Kon-Tiki. They proved the fact that the Polynesians could have very well been populated from the South Americans more so than the Asians, because simply the trade winds and the currents would actually take a drift balsa wood raft from South America to the Polynesian Islands. I mean, so the same types of things can be looked at this way, I guess.
Yeah, and still, it's just one more piece of the puzzle, but it actually puts a piece, like it's kind of like we've created the outside perimeter, like you're supposed to do a puzzle, and it just puts a piece kind of in the middle. It's like, well, we can start putting more pieces around this now, which is key, and that's how science works. And so this is actually a really exciting thing, for a anthro geek like me, like to kind of really there's two distinct waves. We've always said there probably were, but there are two distinct waves of people that were the first North American inhabitants.
They found the hybrid here last fall, where it had actual genetic traits of Homo sapien and I believe it was Neanderthal at the same time in the same individual. And when they pulled the DNA out, it showed that it was closer to that hybrid mix than any other had been found before. And, the more pieces we find to that puzzle, the more closer we're going to get. Those hybrids did exist. You're going to find direct hybrids. You have to have any DNA left over. There had to have been a group of direct hybrids that are out there. And to luckily find something that was closest to that than any we found before is like finding a needle in a stack of needles in the middle of a hayfield.
In the middle of a galaxy full of hayfields. No, but I think that, there's also an ethical problem of doing that sort of testing. It's like, okay, well, because people still have an issue with that sort of thing, or being, partly genetically related to another species. There's some problems with that. So we technically, mathematically, could go back and try to trace lineage back to that point, because we have ways we have mathematical ways of doing that, but the fact that we haven't done that is like, well, should we even really do that?
That does become another question, because be it all the religious question that we don't really get into here on the podcast that much, you have the majority of the planet being Christians, or believing in some sort of deity creation for Homo sapien humans on this planet. That does become difficult to prove those theories different. And different is the big word here, not wrong. In modern Christianity, if you ask a modern preacher or a modern, non-Catholic priest where a Bigfoot would fit into God's plan, they would simply answer that it's just another one of God's creatures, just like a gorilla, just like an orangutan. There's no problem with the existence of Bigfoot. But when you start mixing in the fact that humans are now a direct result of other animals on the planet, and not just picked up from the dirt, grabbed from a rib, and made man and woman, than the direct teachings of what the clerics and, the religious heads have taught these tens of millions of billions of people is now in question. And just like in the Middle Ages, if you could count to more than 1,000 without using, an abacus, you were probably a witch. That's much like we have today. A lot of science is lost because the big Christian footprint has the money to block it.
Yeah, and some people, again, it's like we've been through this so many times. Like, people don't even want to touch it. It's like, no, it's an interesting question, but it's something we should look at later. The data is always going to be there, so let's just wait until we find one more thing that now makes it more socially acceptable to go back and look at this data.
And the more of these like beings that we find along the way, the closer the picture gets, the more the mosaic gets put together, and we actually get an idea of how the spider web actually evolved along the human species. Still does not negate religion, because at that time, the book doesn't say when. When does one become human? And that's one of the things we're going to get into tonight. That's really the kind of the segue into tonight's topic of, are Bigfoot self-aware? Meaning, what does Bigfoot think, if he thinks, when he sees his reflection in a pool of water? Is he like my parrot, thinks it's another parrot and gets angry at it and wants to attack it? Or does he contemplate why he has dirt on his face? And that's really kind of what we're looking at tonight. And with that, David, we're going to go ahead and start off the evening where I put you on the spot.
5 minutes on science.
Go.
See, I made notes on today because this is a really, really big topic, and I'm going to try to do it quickly and efficiently. So what we're talking about is self-awareness, and what a lot of people are going to argue is that the mirror test, as Jeff says, or some other things is like self-recognition, that you can recognize yourself versus being aware of a self, a philosophical self, and some other things like that. So let's just talk about that. So awareness of a philosophical self is the precursor and one of the main components of consciousness.
I think, therefore I am.
Exactly. Oh, but not even that you think, because you don't have to think. It's like, I am aware.
I exist, therefore I am.
I am aware of I. I'm aware of myself. Therefore, like, I am conscious of myself. I have self-awareness. So, like, and self-recognition is like, I recognize that is myself, but you're not aware of your actual physical condition and emotional condition at the time. If you can look at yourself, you know exactly that is you. You know how you feel, and you know how, so there's a lot of these things. There's a ton of debate over animal consciousness, and a lot of, like, even some major universities that did a declaration of animal consciousness and the varying levels, and some of the animals that they say have this sort of a thing. But philosophically, to be self-aware is to be conscious. So the mirror test, what they talk about the mirror test is not just do they recognize themselves in a mirror. A rhesus macaque has a basic recognition of itself after a time. Eventually it realizes it can come to the conclusion that they can recognize themselves, and it's no. A gray parrot is the same way. You can walk up to that mirror, and it's going to take a long time, and eventually you figure out through recognition that, oh, that is me. But you're not exactly aware. It's not like you walk by and you're like, oh, that's a handsome David Batdorf right there.
Yeah. See, that bird's gonna get the knowledge that the more he pecks at the bird in the mirror, it doesn't do anything. I mean, he gets the fact that repetition doesn't really solve anything. So he isn't really self-aware that that's him, but he knows that pecking at whatever that is in the mirror doesn't do him any good.
Or eventually, like a lot of and a parrot being an intelligent animal will get that the fact that the exact mirroring of their movements, they can actually start to affect the image that they're seeing, and whether, like, so again, it's not introspection and self-awareness, but it is self-recognition or recognition of, and this is argued, recognition of their ability to manipulate that image with their own movements. So that's, that comes to be a question there. So what is the mirror test? A lot of times, and they use a lot of controls, and some of them are really interesting. The mirror test is basically like you will sedate or put to sleep like somebody who's really good at this mirror test, like a chimpanzee or a bonobo or a like all the greater apes, chimps, gorillas, bonobos, orangutans are fantastic at this test. The hylobates, the gibbons, and that family, the lesser great apes, right? So the lesser apes are also able to do this. Most of the non-ape primates are terrible at this. They can't do it. They have some, it's more like that self-recognition versus self-awareness. But all of the great apes have a degree of this. But so they'll sedate a bonobo, let's say, and they'll put a dot on his forehead and put him in front of a mirror. And like when they look at themselves, immediately they're like, oh, I have something on my forehead. And sometimes, people are saying, well, they're conditioning these animals and making them look, and now they see something's different, but they do recognize that difference is on their own forehead and not in the image that they're seeing. They touch the different image in front of them versus touching their own forehead, right? So one of the interesting things they've actually done with dolphins, they take like a paint marker, and they mark like right, where you cannot see yourself on the dolphin without a mirror, and they put a mirror out there. And so they mark some dolphins, and they like basically, so they take a paintbrush and they mark the dolphin with a black stripe, and then they also marked a lot of dolphins with nothing but water, just an empty brush. And all the dolphins with the markers were really interested in the mirror, where the watermarked dolphins were not. Interesting enough, and this is where that actual self-awareness comes back in, if the dolphins that were marked with the black on several occasions were marked with water, they knew the touch of that brush and went to check themselves out to see if they were marked in the mirror, to find out that they were not, and then became uninterested in the mirror. So that is the type of testing that we're talking about with the mirror test. We're not just like, can they recognize themselves? It's like, do they react and have an understanding of themselves in a mirror? Because they don't speak English. They can't convey these broad and abstract thoughts of the mind and the brain and
Right.
awareness the way that we can. So what do? We set up a simple test and see if they pass. The animals that pass this in flying colors basically are elephants, corvids, actually, European magpies. They'd put black dots because their heads are black on the ones like the watermark, and they put red dots on some others, and they do similar things. So they are aware of themselves. They also, in the wild, corvids will, if they're being witnessed, caching food, hiding food, stashing for later, and if another corvid sees them, they will wait until that corvid leaves and go move the food. So it's not only an awareness of self, but it's an awareness of the thoughts and intentions of others. So that, like, to be you have to have self-awareness to be aware, to have consciousness of others as well, and to be empathetic and sympathetic and all of these other things that they say that some of these animals are. So elephants, corvids, dolphins, the apes, and some other creatures. People are really debating the parrot thing, but it's possible. Parrots are intelligent, and they can trick us too, because again, they can't really talk to us as much as we'd like their mimicry to be talking, and they can't express to us what they're actually thinking. So there's a lot of debate about that. But so it's all debatable. So yeah, is Sasquatch going to be likely self-aware? Well, if he diverged from us even back to 30,000 years ago. Probably. 30 million years ago. I'm talking about the first tailless monkey. We all agree that Sasquatch doesn't have a tail, and he's probably an ape. So therefore, he probably has the same capability for self-awareness, and therefore some level of consciousness, and therefore some level of sympathy and empathy, and possibly even like future projection. A lot of chimpanzees and gorillas and orangutans have a harder problem with future projection, or they have a harder time with the future projection than chimpanzees and bonobos. They have a really good sense of future projection. But that's where you get into the last little bit here, which I'm going to have to bring up something so I can read off of this, is so what is different about, like, there's self-awareness, and then there's the self-concept. How do we define in us, like, how, so here, animal consciousness is the quality or state of self-awareness within an animal, or being aware of an external object or something within itself. In humans, consciousness has been defined as sentience, awareness, subjectivity, the ability to experience or to feel, wakefulness, and having a sense of selfhood, and an executive control, a control system of the mind. Okay, so we're not asking them to have this consciousness. We're talking about self-awareness. But what is self to us? It's also more like this is what separates us from the chimpanzee and the bonobo, that have all of these, personality traits that are similar. All this, the awareness and the consciousness and other things. So the self-concept is basically like, it's a four-part thing, and this is really what separates us from the animals. There's your self-schematus, basically prior memories, history, things that have happened to you that lead you to believe, hey, I'm an intelligent guy, or I am like a sociable guy, And so you have a preclusion, like you've made an idea of what yourself is to yourself. So it's funny, like in your own mind, you actually do create yourself. So these schematas like actually help to guide you, like say, hey, I'm a really good musician because I think I am, and not because so
you're a really good musician because you practice at being a really good musician.
Well, yeah, but then there's a lot of people, like, you have to break through that where nobody thinks they're good, and then at some point you practice and you break through your own idea that you can't play the guitar to the fact that I can now play the guitar, and it's funny. It works. Trust me. And so we're taking these schematas, these basically our impressions of ourselves, including our past self, all of our emotions and memories from our past, our present self, all of our experiences now, and the most important thing is that we're also experiencing and thinking about our future and possible selves. That all together kind of brings us into the concept of self for somebody. It's our ideas about ourselves, what we've done, what we've experienced, what we are right now, and what we want to be, or what we fear we're going to be, or all these other things. That's what's different than the animals. And now the question would be, does Sasquatch have any of these things? And I would say that it's less than likely that the Sasquatch is going to take this multifaceted approach, because this is a cultural stress. This is cultural evolution versus physical evolution, and this is something that's going to be way too specific. So projecting all of these things onto like our pet dog and all of these other things, like having them be a self-conceptualized being isn't fair to them, because that's not how their culture evolved them to be. So I don't think it's fair to make Sasquatch a self-conceptualized being. Self-aware, yes. Conscious, probably. Self-conceptualized, I'm going to say no.
Yeah, and that is the question that we are posing tonight. Thank you, David. That was
Told you it was going to be complicated.
Yeah, that's a lot of information in a short period of time, but it's important information to kind of understand. And the reason that we're tackling this topic tonight is because we do set a lot of human traits upon animals. My dog loves me. Well, your dog might show you affection, your dog might show you empathy, but your dog by no means is actually showing you love. Love is a human emotion, and it's technically really, we're the only advanced emotional creature on the planet who has exhibited the chemical releases that go along with the feeling and showing of love. Therefore, the emotional showing of pleasure, seeking out your scratches and your tummy rubs is not really an expression of love, but yet us humans do that to animals all the time.
Exactly, and maybe there needs to be more study done. I'm sure when you're rubbing your dog's belly, it releases epinephrine and norepinephrine, which I love. There was a thing on the I fucking love science recently where it was like there were these pendants, there were earrings, epinephrine and norepinephrine. It just said technically the only things you actually enjoy.
Yeah, that's true. Lack of or blast of.
Yeah. So while you're doing that, your dog is probably enjoying that, but does your dog look at you and it release and oxytocin and all these other chemicals? That's like the love hormone that we all
Dark
have.
Chocolate, large amounts. Yeah, the chemical reaction in the human brain is a lot more complex than most of the other animals that are on the planet. Yes, all the other animals on the planet do have a chemically released electrically charged brain that's biomolecularly charged and driven by caloric intake and release. That's the way your body works. That's the way all animals on the planet bodies work. But some are more advanced than others. The brain of the brain of a catfish is nowhere near as advanced as the brain of a shark. Would I say that the brain of a shark would be more capable of empathy than the brain of a catfish? Probably. The brain of a dolphin is more advanced than that of a shark, and so on and so forth. So the brain complexity as we move up in these self-aware, sentient, sapient type of creatures, and that's where we're going to the difference between a sentient being. I exist, therefore I don't want to die, does not mean I exist, therefore I create art.
I mean, sapience is wisdom, and wisdom is also a multifaceted thing, but basically it's not just knowing to not put tomatoes on a fruit salad. It's like being able to project into the future and make decisions based upon what's going to happen. And a lot of animals can do that, but only in a short term. People can do that over years, like projecting basically to the ends of their life. I'm going to make these decisions now that affect me and affect my family and affect my children and my grandchildren.
Right. Through the study that we've gotten so far, we've yet to find a being that really thinks much more past its stomach once you get below the human line. I mean, they're driven by instinct, feeding, and immediate need. Their thought of future is, I'll be hungry later. Some creatures store food for later processes. But past that, the complexity of thought kind of falls off.
There's some interesting differences between, let's say, animals that need culture, chimpanzees live in groups, and also wolves, let's say a wolf pack lives in groups. But the chimpanzees actually play power struggle games with themselves, and they're actually thinking into the future and thinking how to supplant I want to be the next alpha male, or I need to leapfrog this guy in the social system. And so that's interesting. I mean, they also have a really complex brain that's a lot like ours, and
they're a lot further up the evolutionary chain in brain complexity even so than a dolphin is.
Yeah, okay, but another interesting thing about the brain, the actual components of the brain, is I talk about the corvids, and they're talking about the consciousness and all of these things. They've actually used corvids as as an analog to show us that our actual cortical structure is not necessary for consciousness, because it basically there's this substrates around our cortex where we thought consciousness lived that actually light up, and they also light up where the corvids don't have that apparatus, but their substrates activate when they're utilizing their own consciousness. I mean, so it's
right, but that's exactly my point. My point being is the fact that the consciousness is there, but the complexity level of that consciousness, that corvid doesn't think into the future like a human can. It does have some amount of awareness and some amount of the thoughts and actions of others, but it's not thinking anywhere near into the future as a chimpanzee is going to, because the complexity of that level of thought just isn't there. And that's kind of what I was getting at, is as you move up in the animal kingdoms, yes, you can go way down the animal kingdom and find that basic trait of self-awareness, but it broadens and gets more complex as you go further up the evolutionary chain in the larger complex animals. And I'm not just saying primates are the only ones. Dolphins may indeed be the smartest animals on the planet. They're just too damn dumb to communicate with us.
Or we're just not listening. Thanks for all the fish.
Right. So long, and thanks for. Wait, I can't sing that without paying royalties. Never mind.
But yeah, so the interesting thing I want to bring up about self-awareness and, like, you know, wolves would take a wild animal, is the same with dogs, is that wolves and their prey animals, they have to be really acute at identifying others within their species or outside of their species. Like the snowshoe hare has to be able to identify a wolf or else it's going to get eaten. I mean, that's evolution right there, you know. But they cannot identify themselves as themselves. But they can. I mean, they can read. They can communicate back and forth through their body language. They can do all of these things. They know who's to alpha. They know who they got to kowtow to, and they know different individuals as different personalities.
Yeah, but do they know that because they got their ass beat by them enough times to know it?
Well, no, it doesn't matter, but they can, by sight, which is not their primary sense. Their primary sense is going to be their nose. So by their secondary sense, they can identify that history, that memory, but they can identify those individuals. So that's interesting, but they can't walk up to a mirror and identify themselves because evolutionarily there's no need to do that. They just know who's going to kick their ass and who they got to put down because they're coming up, you know, and getting that pup's
right.
bigger than me, so I got to put them down right now.
Right.
But again, a complex social group, but it's totally different, like the wolves versus the primates. Even though, I mean,
right, it's more of a hive life more so than it is a social life. Like you get into the chimpanzees and the bonobos, and again, we're going back down the evolutionary chain into these lesser animals who don't have the complexity or the emotional or chemical reactions in their brains to the levels that the higher levels do. And that's where we're getting back into the question of Bigfoot. Everybody wants to make them a tribal people. You know, a lost Indian tribe, they're humans, and they're just out there. It could be. I really don't know, and I always tell this. I've said it on the podcast for, you know, a couple of years now. Nobody knows. We don't have those answers yet. We will eventually. But the likelihood of them being human is very, 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 very small. From the evidence that is left behind, it seems that there are enough morphological changes between a Sasquatch and a human being to think that they are a lesser developed animal than what humans are.
The development of our brain, the actual growth, and all of these other things were like, you know, there were a lot of stresses that caused that. And whether or not, you know, like Sasquatch was involved in that portion of the evolutionary tree, probably not. Like even through Homo erectus, we were still looking at like a 350 to 500 cc brain, not our like 1700 cc like melons we got now. Right. So
that's why they didn't have trigonometry either.
Yeah, and why
they were able to make clothes, but they weren't solving long, complex math.
Yeah, well, no. At that point, I mean, clothes are not even. I mean, we're talking no animal skins. We're talking about some stones that were broken in half that were a little bit sharp and no fire. But and then as things progressed, yeah, all that came out. But a lot of, like, when we're talking about self and self-recognition and the importance of self, probably came out in a survival need, because self is actually tied to being empathetic and sympathetic with your other troop, and as I always think, like, as things kind of spread apart and the cataclysms that really took its toll on all of all the extinct hominins and everything else, and like we really to survive and to become a species, because we probably should have gone extinct, it was because of our brains and because of our sympathetic behavior towards each other, which is shown in a couple interesting sites, like I always go back to the Georgia, the Demonacy site. You know, there's an old man who had lost all of his teeth, but he had lost all of his teeth so long ago that somebody was obviously chewing and preparing him food that he could eat to survive that long, to have his jaw kind of calcify over the teeth he didn't starve to death. He got eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. He didn't starve to death.
Right.
So, and that's like a million years ago, and we're talking about cataclysms that happened like down in the like down into like 120,000 years ago. So almost a tenth that amount, like later in time, and so I mean that's. We have to identify with ourselves to be able to identify other people and the problems, and to band together and to kind of to have saved our species. And there's some interesting studies out there where people speculate this, but they're all, I mean, you could debate anything. I mean, it's all in bones and the stories in caves and whatever. It's just nothing, you know.
Yeah, we just don't have enough of that mosaic puzzle put together to really say definitively much of anything at this point, other than we can kind of see the line back to where we started. There's a whole bunch of missing pieces in between where we are now and where we started from, but we can kind of follow all that genetic code backwards to see that, well, if a chimpanzee is, 97.6% the exact same DNA as humans, then obviously we shared an ancestor somewhere along the line because we're all primates.
And because DNA mutates effectively as an effect of time, we can say how long ago that happened. And the same as like our split from Neanderthal. Now that we have a Neanderthal genome, we can say, well, this is where the split should have happened.
Right, and now that's going to give or take 3 or 4 million years. I mean, we're not going to be able to nail it down to this decade or that decade that there were no more Neanderthals.
Well, they're getting it down to within thousands of years. I mean, the algorithms are getting better for actually doing that, because I mean, literally, it's just the amount of changes as an effect of time, and so this many changes for this amount of time, you can just go backwards in time, and it's been pretty effective to matching up with some of the dating that we're doing, like whether it's geological dating and carbon dating or whatever. Like with all those three things combined, they're doing pretty good. Like it's pretty much between like in that 500,000 year, give or take 100,000 years, is where that change should have happened.
We need a La Brea tar pit of primates. That's really what we need. We need something that was there for 170 million years, and there was some poor animal just got stuck in that crap one time, once a month for the length of that time, and nothing but primates, because that's literally how much we're missing versus how much we actually have. And that's where the bigger minds have to kind of come in and fill in the gaps. And we all know that a lot of those gaps are filled in wrong.
We keep changing them and going back, and when I was in high school and really actually starting to get interested in anthropology and human evolution and everything. But God, that was a long time ago. But anyway, so much has changed. I mean, Neanderthal, we were a direct descendant from Neanderthal at that time. I mean, like now we're cousins. We were never related. We were related at one point probably to Heidelbergensis. Well, we might find out that's wrong too. Like so we keep to kind of, but as we're doing that,
may end up being a mix-in with the Neanderthal that's actually there, and that's where the leftover trait was to begin with.
Or the Heidelbergensis was like, okay, well then you went off into Denisova and here, and then we split off on our own way. Like, but again, like timing wise and dating wise, that makes sense, and geographically and geologically, and like so all that makes sense. But that doesn't mean that it's right. It just means it's logically thought through, and you can write a paper about it. but it's the best we have.
The Smithsonian for 25 years had at the Museum of Natural History a beautiful dinosaur exhibit that I saw in my youth in its prime, and it was absolutely wonderful that they had these animals there. However, they found out a decade after I had viewed it that 2 of the poor animals' heads were indeed wrong. And on the wrong bodies.
There was no Brontosaurus.
That's correct. And, that whole loss of an entire subspecies of dinosaur just because once they really thought the process through and said, well, this head doesn't really fit on this neck, so we'll hang it here for now because it was laying with it, but... Oh, man. And then when they finally found a complete structure of one that included its head, they realized, of course, that Mr. Brontosaurus's head was not Mr. Brontosaurus's head.
At all, yeah, and so, but that's how that whole science works. It's like the neck bone's connected to the head bone. Well, if two things died on top of each other, and then one head fossilized and the other didn't, I mean, like, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do?
Well, I mean, it literally took some dude, some little pencil neck geek who's up there with a friggin' gauge going, this is just like 3 centimeters off. It's just not gonna work. This head's not gonna fit this neck. I don't care what you people say. This neck is not fit for this head. Where's his head? And then he goes back there and tries on every friggin' head until he finally gets it right. I don't know what the process was, but we don't have that for the primate line, and that's a shame because it would just answer so many more developmental questions as to, yes, we know that they had the big brain, but like you said, it was 750 cc's. Still 1,000 cc's less than what we're dealing with now, and we don't really know that why. We know in what creature, but we don't know what it was that caused that explosion in self-consciousness. Is that what it is? I mean, that's really, because that's where the human species came from, was that first moment of,
holy
what
crap.
do I do next?
I'm me.
What do I do next?
Exactly. Like, and so, yeah, you're right. We do. We know which creature it happened in. We also know which creature, like, the fully orthograde bipedalism happened in, and other thing, like when we lost our hair based on some other weird stuff. So we know all of these things, but it doesn't help. Again, it's like putting a parrot in front of a mirror. You really don't know this big abstract thing. You can't tell that from bones, and you can't tell that from fossils, and we'll never be able to. We'll probably never know exactly when it happened. But I mean, so that's.
There was a fundamental change in when it became human to I, and that's my big thing with it. I talk about this all the time, and yeah, I'm going to step up on the pulpit here for a moment, but I have this big saying that I use. It's simply, it isn't so much what is the same that makes us human, it's what is different that actually qualifies us as human. And to give those human traits away to the animal kingdom is to give away what is your fundamental basic. Being human is not special. And it is. I mean, yes, we're probably the most destructive organism on this planet. I'll give you that. But we've created some of the most beautiful things that the animal kingdom is never capable of doing. And that, to me, what seems to be the difference between I know I exist and, I know I have a future. Giving those traits away to the animal kingdom to me is just a shame. It shows that you don't feel that being human is special at all. And to me, the human connection, that complex brain structure and those emotional responses that we get when we interact with each other is a special connection that I hope that we never lose. And if Bigfoot turns out that he has those emotional connections and that they are sapient, for lack of a better word, so be it. But if they were capable of such thought, I think by now they would have stepped out and told us. That's kind of my thought on it for the evening, and thank you very much for listening.
This sermon was brought to you by the Reverend Jeff Kelly. May the squash be with you.
Suck it!
Nope. That's not the end of it.
You see, I'm all for learning all we can about the capacities and capabilities of animals, but you got to prove it. And interesting studies and fantastic studies, you have to keep recreating them, basically. And that's, if you can't recreate them, then it's not science, and you can't give it up quite like that.
Yeah, I'll give it out to Steven Stupert. He made a post the other day in the Coalition for Science page that said something to the effect that, incredible claims require incredible proof. And I said, no, incredible claims just require a big mouth at a YouTube channel. I'm living proof of that. To which he responded, if you want others to believe your incredible claims, then incredible proof is required. And I say, you are absolutely right. And to take a picture of something that is cloaked and tell me that it's there, I can't see it, in the picture is not proof. Sorry. Proof is something you can see, touch, smell, tangible, something I can believe.
Something you can share.
Yeah, something exactly.
If it's something that you saw, touched, and smelled, and can't share it, that's an experience. It's not evidence. It's not proof. So like we always do, we need to try harder. We need to do a better job of extracting the data from our experiences, or else we're gonna Jeff and I will have this job forever because we'll just get to keep talking about that. But
yeah, we don't mind going back over these topics for everybody. I mean, this is one we hadn't covered before. This was actually brought up, I believe, by Buck. Asked us to talk about it, and I'm down with that. Guys, send us your suggestions. Send us your show topic ideas. I mean, we really do work hard at this to get everything right. But sometimes it's tough to come up with new topics that you guys are wanting to be talking about or listening to us talk about or research for you. And we'll be happy to do that. And while I'm actually on that subject, let me go ahead and do a little bit of housekeeping. Come on over and find us at the Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/SLounge. That'll actually get you into the Squatchers Lounge group. You can find Mitchell Wilson and me and Alita and Kip Morrill and our buddy David here. We all admin the page and take care of and bounce people as necessary. But that really, there's like 5 people who's ever been banned from the lounge. I mean, it's ridiculous how well kept it really is. And sometimes we get a little out of hand, and sometimes, tempers fly. But we do the best that we can.
Debate and a tiff here and there. I mean, that's just going to happen in a group. But if somebody's coming in and causing trouble, I mean, we don't have time for that. So.
The drama's not allowed in the lounge. Come on over and drink your coffee and read along. We'll have lots of fun. Also, come over and find our fan page at facebook.com/SLounge podcast. That'll put you over to our fans page. Give it a like and make sure you add it to an interest list and make sure you get notifications or you won't see it. Suck part about Facebook is now, even though we have all of our fans, only like 3 to 5% of you get notified when we actually post something. So we depend upon you guys to like and share and put this stuff everywhere. Share it to your home pages. We'd very much appreciate it because without paying for it, Facebook does not allow our fans to see every post that we put out, and that's a shame, and there's nothing we can do about it. So we're going to have to ask you guys out there to click like, click share, make comments, point people over to the fan page, because we're going to prove to Facebook that we're not going to pay for this crap.
Shame on you, Facebook.
Shame on you. Shame on you, Facebook. You guys made $6.5 billion profit last quarter. How much is enough? How damn greedy do you have to be before enough is enough? I know you've got shareholders now, but damn it, your shareholders are members too. I'm sure you're sick of looking at all the ads. Think about that. You shareholders out there for Facebook, I know you're listening to this stuff. You own 10 shares, guess what? You've got to say. And if you're sick of all the ads in your feed too, well, the next shareholders meeting, show up and say something about it, because I ain't buying Facebook stock, not with this crap. Anyhow, I'm going to get down off my soapbox now. David, what you got coming up here soon, buddy?
I'm just going to go ahead and say that, my expeditions are going to be pretty much not happening. If I have some time and a good ability, like I'm going to go on some hikes, but it's just I keep having all these good intentions, and I'm not going to lie to anybody anymore. Like having the baby and a new job is hard. And so I'll do what I can. I'll share when I can. If any of you,
as long as you'll keep us up on the science geek stuff, it's all good.
Yeah, that's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna be the science geek.
The future Squatching generation is far more important than worrying about you being out in the hills right now.
Well, I'm taking care of that future generation right now.
That's right. Ladies and gentlemen, that's actually our time tonight. I want to thank everybody for joining in with us. Unfortunately, Jamie has. I'm worried about him. I'm going to send him a message right after the show, and hopefully we'll hear back from him. For the last couple of minutes, I did want to talk about the Bluff Creek Project. I know I've talked about it the last couple of weeks, and I've asked you guys to go out and see about some donations, but the PayPal link was broke-ticated, so that didn't really do us any good. However, it is out there now. The Bluff Creek Game Cam Project. What these guys are doing is they are literally collecting game cams, SD cards, battery donations out, and they have over 20 game cams set up around the Bluff Creek film site locations. Live action, 24/7, 365 days a year, trying to get that picture of the Bigfoot. And I got to tell you, I've been up there myself. It is one of the squatchiest places on the planet. These guys have probably one of the best bets at getting this done. A $12 donation makes you a battery sponsor. That takes care of one change of batteries for this round. That's not even for the year, guys. That's just this round. One camera. It's $12 to change them out. And we got to do this a few times a year. So we're asking right now, budget's like $509, and that will actually get us a full battery change on all the cameras that we have out there right now. But we need more. And I know the donations can always go above what we're asking for. But, you know, we need to get some new cameras out there as well. 20 cameras doesn't even scratch the surface of this vast area that's out there. I mean, we're talking about canyon after canyon. 20 cameras will barely even cover 2% of what we're actually looking at. 200 cameras is more really what we're really looking at. And that's, you know, that costs a lot of cash. And these guys are hardworking people. They're family members, and they're not putting it out of their pocket because they just don't have it. So we're asking the public for some help. The Indiegogo campaign, you can search for the Bluff Creek Project out there, and right there on their website, it'll come up, and the PayPal link now works. We verified it this last night with Jamie. That's why I said he should have been on the show tonight. Dadgummit. We'll try again next week to have him on. We are running gag, I guess. But go on out to the Indiegogo.com and search for the Bluff Creek Project and give them a donation and get that project up over $509 so that we can at least get the battery changes done this round. $50. Wes has made some really cool hand art paintings that for a $50 donation, he'll mail you one of those at his cost. So way to go, Les. We very much appreciate that as well. $100 gets you an invitation to come camping with us down at Louse Creek. We are going to be camping down at Louse Creek sometime this summer. I can't exactly tell you when because I don't know myself, but that's right, you heard it right. The Reverend Jeff will be there camping at Louse Creek for the Bluff Creek Project. So for a $100 donation, gets you an invitation to come on down with us. Now, that's just an invitation to camp, people. We ain't feeding you. We ain't housing you. Bring your own crap. But we'll get you into the actual film location, and we'll get up into Louse Creek to camp for a night or two. And that, my friends, is well worth the $100 invitation cost. For $300, you get to be a camera sponsor. That puts a brand new camera with a card and the battery pack in their hands. Puts a brand new unit out in the forest for them to get pictures of Bigfoot. And if you become a camera sponsor, I'm pretty sure we can put your name on it so that if your camera gets the big guy, guess what? Well, I guess we can give you some credit for owning the camera that did it. That's right. The Bluff Creek Project on Indiegogo. Go out there and get them up over project, people, because we really need this project to continue. Thanks for listening. David?
Yes, sorry, I was just noticing we got a new Freudian slip news actually just popped up here while we were in here, and I just want to give a shout out to Chris York and Matt Nav and Steve Alcorn doing that thing. Apparently this episode is 3 UFOs over China, the Pentagon zombie outbreak plan, the origins of the jackalope, which I'm really interested in, and our Aleister Crowley's gay poems. This webcast is uncensored for your pleasure.
Absolutely. Speaking of Matt Knapp, do not forget to go over and catch Bigfoot Revolutions. Him and Phil Poling taking a look at the Bigfoot topics like we do, but unlike our show, boy, they don't really pull too many punches. It's Matt Knapp's specialty. We love Matt. We love Phil. Don't care if you do. That's not our problem. Go listen to the show anyhow, because you know what? Just like Howard Stern, you never know what they're going to say next. That would be at youtube.com/Bigfoot Revolution. No S. And with that, guys, I want to thank you, David, for coming in, doing the show, a special edition Friday night. We will be back again on time next week, Wednesday night, 7 p.m., correct? You don't? Did you check your schedule yet? We'll talk about that after the show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're good for Wednesday night, 7 p.m.
All right, 7 p.m. Pacific, right here at youtube.com/S Lounge Podcast. For David Batdorf and myself, the Reverend Jeff Kelly, we thank you for watching the Squatchers Lounge Podcast, Season 2, Episode 20. Are Bigfoot self-aware? Thanks for watching. May the Squatch be with you.